They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood slowly drains you until there's nothing left? The fluorescent lights above the conference table buzzed like angry wasps as I clicked to the final slide of my presentation. 3 years of architectural planning, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of creative energy I possessed had gone into this project. The Manhattan skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a testament to ambition and dreams made real. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, my hands trembled as I gripped the laser pointer. The sustainable design elements will reduce energy consumption by 40%, I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion clawing at my bones. Dark circles rimmed my eyes, evidence of another week surviving on coffee and determination. The executives nodded approvingly, but their faces blurred together like watercolors in rain. That's when the room tilted sideways, and everything went black. I awoke to the antiseptic smell of Manhattan General Hospital, machines beeping in steady rhythm around me. A nurse with kind eyes adjusted my IV drip, while explaining they'd contacted my emergency contacts. My heart lifted for the first time in months. Finally, they would come. Finally, my family would show they cared about more than what I could provide for them. Hour after hour, I watched that hospital room door. Every footstep in the hallway sent hope racing through my chest, but only strangers passed by. No phone calls came, no text messages chimed. The silence stretched on like a living thing, feeding on my desperation and growing stronger with each passing minute. Ben, my colleague who'd called the ambulance, visited twice with flowers and concerned questions about my workload. He was the only person who seemed to remember I existed as more than a walking ATM. When he left the second evening, promising to handle my project presentations, I finally reached for my phone with shaking fingers. 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. 0 from family. I opened social media with the desperate hope of finding some explanation, some emergency that had kept them away. Instead, I found a knife twisted slowly in my heart. Chloe, my younger sister, had posted a video just hours ago. Family day without the drama, Lake Tahoe fun. The caption gleamed with artificial cheerfulness above footage of our parents laughing with Chloe and Brooke, my older sister, as they splashed in crystal-clear mountain water. Without the drama. Without me. They were having the time of their lives while I lay alone in a hospital bed, tubes in my arms and monitors tracking my vital signs. The contrast couldn't have been sharper if they'd planned it deliberately. Maybe they had. I turned my face to the wall and let the tears come. 2 days passed in this purgatory of abandonment before my phone erupted in a cacophony of missed calls. Richard, my father, had apparently discovered he needed something from me. His text messages arrived like slaps across digital space. "We need you. Answer immediately." Not, "How are you feeling?" or "Are you okay?" Just demands wrapped in the familiar cloak of entitlement I'd grown up believing was love. I stared at his name flashing on my screen and made the first autonomous decision I'd made in years. I declined the call. "They only need me when I'm useful," I whispered to the empty room. "Right now, I'm not." In that moment of crystalline clarity, I remembered Grandpa Arthur. He'd always been different from the rest of my family, treating me like a person rather than a resource. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. "Kiddo?" His warm voice crackled through the phone. "I've been worried sick since Ben called me. How are you holding up?" The sob that escaped me contained 3 decades of suppressed pain. Within an hour, Grandpa Arthur sat beside my hospital bed, his weathered hand covering mine. His presence felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Looks like they finally broke you, didn't they, kiddo?" he said, his voice gentle but knowing. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "Don't you worry about a thing, sweetheart. Family takes care of family." He squeezed my hand. Real family. While I recovered, Arthur handled the hospital bills my insurance had mysteriously rejected, making phone calls with the efficiency of someone who'd navigated bureaucracy for 8 decades. More importantly, he sat with me as I finally admitted the truth I'd been hiding from myself for years. I wasn't their daughter or sister. I was their infrastructure. The evidence was overwhelming once I stopped making excuses for them. Monthly transfers to Chloe, always disguised as emergency support but funding her lifestyle blog and designer purchases. Rent payments for Brooke's apartment while she played at being an entrepreneur with her failing online boutique. Car insurance for my mother, Susan, who'd convinced me it was temporary help after Dad's business troubles that had mysteriously lasted 5 years. And the massive personal loan bearing my name and credit score but funding Chloe's cross-country move to Los Angeles, complete with a luxury apartment deposit I'd never agreed to. Arthur took notes in his careful handwriting, occasionally shaking his head. "They bled you dry, didn't they, like leeches?" The metaphor was apartment. I'd been so busy trying to prove my worth through generosity that I'd never noticed how they only called when they needed something, how family gatherings became financial planning sessions, how my accomplishments were measured solely by how much I could contribute to their comfort. Sitting in that hospital bed, I began the process of reclaiming my life. Bank passwords changed. Automatic transfers canceled, credit cards with additional authorized users, Users I'd never actually authorized locked down. Each action felt like removing chains I'd never realized I was wearing. When I was discharged a week later, Ben insisted on driving me home and stocking my refrigerator. His genuine concern stood in stark contrast to my family's silence. No one had even asked when I'd be released. That's when the social media war began. Chloe launched her campaign with the precision of someone who'd weaponized victimhood into an art form. Videos of her crying into her phone camera, talking about how I'd abandoned the family in their time of need. Brooke posted subtle but cutting messages about gratitude and turning your back on the people who raised you. My parents began a coordinated assault of phone calls and text messages, not asking about my health but demanding I fix this situation immediately. "You're ruining this family, Alara," Richard shouted over voicemail after voicemail. But I said nothing, did nothing. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't rush to soothe their anger or fix their problems. I focused on healing, on rediscovering who I was beneath the layers of guilt and obligation they'd wrapped around me like burial shrouds. Ben, bless him, had connections in tech from his college days. When he showed me what he'd found, I felt vindicated in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. The timestamps on Chloe's family day without the drama posts coincided perfectly with my hospital stay. Screenshots of my banking records obtained through a private investigator Arthur had discreetly hired showed years of one-way financial support. The contrast between their public narrative and documented reality was devastating. When this evidence surfaced online, the response was swift and merciless. Chloe's sponsors dropped her like a contaminated product. Brooke's boutique was flooded with refund requests and scathing reviews. Richard faced professional consequences when his largest client discovered the family scandal and questioned his character. Their perfect facade crumbled as quickly as they'd built it. But they weren't finished with me yet. Arthur arrived at my apartment with a manila envelope that changed everything. Inside were legal documents attempting to establish emergency guardianship over me, filed by Richard and Susan. According to their petition, I was mentally unstable and financially incompetent following my breakdown. They wanted complete control over my assets, my medical decisions, my entire existence. "They're not just after your money, Alara," Arthur said grimly. "They want your entire life." The rage that filled me was clean and purposeful, unlike the confused hurt I'd carried for so long. This wasn't just betrayal, this was erasure. They literally wanted to make me disappear as an autonomous human being. Arthur had already contacted Sarah Rodriguez, a sharp young lawyer with fire in her eyes and a reputation for protecting vulnerable clients from predatory family members. Sarah gathered evidence with methodical thoroughness. Medical records proving my complete mental competency, employment records showing I'd requested leave proactively rather than suffering a breakdown, and financial documents demonstrating that my recent account changes were deliberate decisions, not signs of instability. The guardianship petition was dismissed before it ever reached trial. Their lawyer withdrew from the case, unwilling to proceed with such obviously fraudulent claims. Months later, the final insult arrived in my mailbox. A formal letter from Richard announcing their revised family will. I had been completely disinherited until I repented and returned to the family fold. I read it once, then did something that would have horrified the old Alara. I laughed. The sound startled me with its genuine joy. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely amused, rather than desperately trying to manage someone else's emotions. They thought their money was leverage over me, but I'd never wanted their inheritance. I'd only wanted to matter to them as a person. With Sarah's help, I drafted formal documents renouncing any claim to the Vance family estate and establishing a permanent no-contact order. Each signature felt like cutting another chain. Arthur and I moved to a small town in the Colorado Rockies, where mountain air filled my lungs and silence felt like peace rather than abandonment. I started freelance architectural work, designing sustainable homes for people who appreciated creativity over profit margins. Ben visited regularly, our friendship deepening into something warmer and more substantial. On clear mornings, I sat on my porch with coffee and watched the sunrise paint the peaks gold and pink. Arthur would join me, sharing stories about his late wife or commenting on the weather with the contentment of someone who'd learned to find joy in simple moments. "Peace is better than being loved only when you're useful," I told him one morning. He nodded, understanding in his expression. "Real love doesn't come with conditions, kiddo." News filtered back about my former family's continued decline. Richard had lost his job entirely and been forced to sell their house. Susan worked retail to supplement his unemployment benefits. Brooke had moved back home after her business failed completely. Chloe's influencer career never recovered from the scandal, leaving her scraping by with part-time work that felt beneath the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. They lived in bitterness now, blaming each other and me for their downfall rather than acknowledging their own actions. When I heard these updates, I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only profound relief that I was no longer trapped in their toxic ecosystem. One morning, Ben joined Arthur and me on the porch as we watched another spectacular sunrise. He'd been visiting more frequently, his tech company job now fully remote. The three of us had become our own small family, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. "This isn't just a new chapter," I said, taking both their hands as golden light spilled across the valley below us. "It's an entirely new book, and I'm finally the author." Arthur squeezed my hand. "About time you started writing your own story, kiddo." Ben smiled and pointed to a pair of eagles soaring above the tree line. "Look at that. They mate for life, but they hunt alone. Independence and partnership." I understood what he meant. I'd spent so many years believing I had to choose between being loved and being free. But real love, the kind Arthur had always shown me, the kind growing between Ben and me, didn't require sacrifice of self. It enhanced who you were rather than diminishing you. The woman who'd collapsed in that Manhattan conference room felt like a stranger now. She'd been so focused on earning love through service that she'd forgotten she was inherently worthy of care and respect. She'd confused being needed with being valued, exploitation with affection. I'd built a new life from the ground up, one based on my own values and boundaries rather than other people's demands. My architectural work brought me joy because I chose projects that aligned with my environmental principles. My relationships were reciprocal, filled with people who appreciated my presence rather than just my productivity. Sometimes I received messages from distant relatives or old neighbors, forwarding gossip about how Chloe and Brooke still spoke badly of me years later. I'd read these messages with the same detached interest I might show a news article about strangers, then delete them. Their opinions no longer had power over my self-worth. The sun climbed higher, warming our faces as birds called to each other across the mountains. Arthur dozed in his chair while Ben sketched the landscape in a small notebook he always carried. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tasting pine and possibility on the mountain air. I'd learned that healing wasn't a destination but a daily choice. Some mornings I still woke with echoes of old guilt, phantom pains from amputated toxic relationships. But I'd also learned to recognize these feelings as memories rather than reality, weather systems that would pass if I didn't feed them with attention. My phone buzzed with a notification from a potential client interested in commissioning an eco-friendly cabin design. I smiled as I read the message, already envisioning solar panels and natural materials integrated seamlessly into the mountain landscape. This was meaningful work, creating beauty and sustainability rather than just meeting quotas for people who saw me as replaceable. Arthur woke from his nap and patted my hand. "What's got you smiling, kiddo?" "Everything," I said simply. "Just everything." And for the first time in my life, that was true. I'd lost a family that had never really been mine, but gained something infinitely more valuable myself. The woman I'd become was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than the one who'd fallen unconscious in that conference room. She'd learned the difference between being generous and being exploited, between loving someone and enabling them, between being needed and being valued. The mountains stretched endlessly before us, peaks touching sky in a panorama of possibility. Somewhere in Manhattan, there were conference rooms and buzzing fluorescent lights, people sacrificing their health and happiness for the approval of others who would never be satisfied. But I was here, breathing free air and writing my own story, and that made all the difference. As evening approached, painting the sky in shades of coral and lavender, Ben helped Arthur inside for dinner while I lingered on the porch for a few more minutes. The first stars were appearing, pinpricks of light in the deepening darkness. I made a silent promise to that frightened woman who'd once measured her worth by her utility to others. I would never again mistake being used for being loved. I would never again set myself on fire to keep others warm. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that true family, real love, and genuine peace came not from what I could give others, but from finally giving myself the respect, boundaries, and care I deserved. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.